Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm Vered Kogan, and I'm so delighted to introduce you to Dr. Mark Young. Mark is the founder and CEO of Jekyll Hyde Labs. He leveraged his passion for neuroscience, persuasion, and human biology to build this agency into one of the nation's most successful advertising agencies for challenger and emerging brand consumer products. Jekyll Hyde has won dozens of national awards and represents consumer products in every major retailer in the US. It has been the driving force behind hundreds of successful consumer packaged goods products with combined sales measured in the billions. Dr. Mark's endeavors also include being nationally recognized as an expert in longevity and performance. As one of the top 50 influencers in the mental and physical space, he is a frequent speaker and teacher of longevity programs for entrepreneurs and health professionals. Mark is also an author. His book is called HYPNO-TI ING: The Secrets and Science of Ads That Sell More. He co-hosts multiple podcasts and is a pilot, motorcyclist, and soon-to-be Guinness record-holding race car driver.
I actually do have the Guinness record now.
Woohoo! Congratulations. That's super cool. Super cool. So, first of all, such a cool introduction for a really well-rounded and also well-rounded on the inside kind of individual. And what I mean by that is that you really understand the psychology of change and what drives human behavior. And you've used that through, in the lens of marketing, also in the lens of how to create changes in our own health, how to use the power of the mind to make real changes in our life, physical and otherwise. So it is really such an honor to have you on this podcast, which is all about the power of our mindset. So welcome, Mark.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So one of the questions that we often ask, that we often get asked is, how do we create changes in our life? And that is for our own personal lives, for example, health and wellness and so on. Or how do we influence others? How do we cause like immediate transformational change in how others perceive things or perceive themselves? So what do you think is important for people to know about that?
Well, the first thing is for anybody to change, the individual has to reach a condition called threshold. And threshold is simply this: there has to be change, it has to be now, and it has to be me. That is when the drug addict decides to stop being a drug addict. That is when the alcoholic quits being an alcoholic. Everything else is just the details. But threshold has to be met first. Now, threshold isn't just about giving up being a drug addict. Threshold could be, I want to advance my career. I want to have a better relationship. That's the key. There has to be change. It has to be now, and it has to be me. I'll talk to people on relationships. And I'm always trying to tell people who have a relationship issue, you can't change the other person, but you have 100% control of changing you. So why are you so focused on, I want my husband or wife to do something else, when you have the ability to make these massive changes to yourself, which chances are will probably get you to the place you want to be, or if nothing else, get you to the point of knowing you deserve something better.
So how do we reach that threshold?
Uh, it's a decision. It's a moment. You know, Tony Robbins, Tony always talks about change happens immediate and flamboyantly. I like Tony, but I don't always think that change happens flamboyantly. That's kind of his term. But he is right that the moment of change happens immediately. That threshold is a decision. It is those three questions, whether people realize the three questions or not. That's the three things that they said to themselves. Uh, and again, think about the drug addict. I'm going to keep using drugs, and then it's finally, I can't take this anymore. And when you look at change, one of the things I try to tell people, the biggest fear that humans have is not the fear of death. It's not the fear of public speaking. It's the fear of change. Change is what we fear. Change is what keeps a woman in a bad relationship. yes, he's abusive to me, but what if nobody else ever likes me? What if I don't ever get another man? What would life be like without this drug? Because this drug is all I know. And I can't imagine what my life would be like if I could never drink again. We're afraid of change. In our business, our advertising agency, pardon me, what we do, what good advertising does, it doesn't sell things to people that they don't need. You should never be trying to sell something to people that they don't need, and most people won't buy what they don't need. But what you should be doing in your communication is helping people overcome their own fear of change and try something new that will make their life better. So I have a arthritis product. Well, my job as their agency is, how do I get people to try this new arthritis product so their life will improve? Now, if their life doesn't improve, they're not going to buy it again. All the advertising world won't keep a bad product alive. But if I do a good job, if they make a good product and I do the right job, then I'm going to improve a number of people's lives who are going to suffer less with arthritis pain or whatever the case might be, sleeping, who knows, whatever the topic is. So overcoming fear of change is where we need to work. And it's not only where we need to work in advertising, it's where people need to work in their own life, because we set up these roadblocks for ourselves. I look at the second thing that sets up roadblocks for people, and that is, and I'm going to go to a Dan Sullivan quote. Dan says he has these 3 rules for life. His 3 rules for life is everything's made up, no one's in charge, and life isn't fair. So when we think of those 3 things, when we think about, well, no one's really in charge. Okay, well then go be in charge. Everything's made up, which means you can make it up. Life isn't fair. But when we say life isn't fair, are we saying, why me? Or are we saying, why not me? And it's that little nuance change that we need to get people to adapt to. Instead of, why should I be a millionaire? It should be, why shouldn't I be a millionaire? What's the value that I can bring to people that would get people to want to pay me that kind of money? And again, it's not figuring out how can I be clever and get the money. It's how can I add value? How can whatever I'm offering be so amazing and so incredible that my offer grossly exceeds my ask? That what I'm asking for seems like a bargain compared to what I'm offering you.
So I really appreciate that you brought in kind of Dan's, 3 uh, mindsets. They're really, I mean, they're kind of belief systems, if you will, and the fact that we are empowered to look at each of those 3 things, as you said, from a more from a lens of self-efficacy. I can do something about this. I can change this, which is why you said the threshold, the third part of the threshold is it has to be me. So there is really a sense of ownership that needs to happen here, to cross that threshold, in addition to a realization of why change, why now. So how did you,
Go ahead.
please.
I was going to say, when I was on stage with Joe Polish, Joe asked me what was the moment in my life that was the turning point of my career. And my comment to him was, it was a moment I realized that I was responsible for everything that happened, good and bad. When I finally figured out, just because somebody didn't pay me, that's still my fault because I decided to do business with them. And when I finally figured out I'm the author of all the good stuff and the bad stuff, that's when everything turned around. if we can make mistakes, we can make corrections. It's getting people to understand there's a winning team, a losing team, and a learning team. In all of my companies, we don't have a losing team. We have a winning team and we have a learning team. If we make a mistake, then we can learn a lesson from it and we can move forward and we can use that and leverage that new knowledge for something better. Then it wasn't a loss. It was a lesson. But people get themselves in these, we kind of get ourselves in these funks that, everything's going wrong for me. And momentum has a big impact on us. We were all here in Detroit. I'm from Detroit in Florida. We were all excited about the Detroit Lions getting an attempt to go to the Super Bowl because they've never been there. And if any of you watched that first game, the Lions came out, and in the first half of that game, they were playing that game like they were at a whole nother level of playing football. Just dominated the first half. Then they came out in the second half. San Francisco got their legs back, and the momentum turned against them. And you watch the Lions just make mistake after mistake after mistake because they lost their momentum. They lost that winning mentality that they had in the first half. And you literally just watch the game slip away from them. It was, I don't know if you saw that game, but it was literally like two teams came out in the first half and then two different teams came out in the second half. It was that radically different. And that was because the 49ers, on their halftime break, somehow their coach got them to set aside the bad first half we had. He got them to put that out of their mind and go out on that field and start over. Meanwhile, the Lions came out thinking they were in charge. And as soon as they got hit a couple of times, it shocked them and things unraveled for them. Well, those things happen in our lives all the time. We take a hit and then we don't recover from it. I have a friend of mine who he had his own business. He was doing very well. He ended up going bankrupt 30 plus years ago, ended up going bankrupt. He has emotionally never recovered because that failure and that bankruptcy has now become him. That's who he is now. It wasn't an event. It wasn't just something that happened. It now identifies who I am. And we've got to get people out of that kind of mindset. These are events. Events, good or bad. You can fall apart from them or you can learn from them. Did you ever know Joe Paulus's friend Sean?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Sean Stevenson. Sean passed away now.
Oh, yes, I have. Sean Stevenson. I did. I got to see him at an event and actually have a beautiful conversation with him. Yeah.
I mean, think about that guy. If anyone had an excuse to just say, poor me, he was a guy that deserved that excuse. For those of you who don't know who he is, this is a guy who had a brittle bone disease from when he was born. I mean, literally just moving could break a bone, lived his life in a wheelchair. Sean had no legs. I mean, Sean was a disaster physically, but emotionally and mentally, he was a giant. And again, you got a chance to talk to him. I mean, he was an amazing person, wasn't he?
He was.
And he never let that wheelchair be an excuse for who he was or why he couldn't do something. I love people like that because people like Sean Stevenson, they take away all your excuses. Literally, you can look at him and say, well, what's your problem? Because do you have any problems in your life that equal that? No, you don't. So what's your excuse? Because this guy is out doing it. And what's holding you back?
So how do we create that winning mindset, right? Because obviously to cause for ourselves or for others a sustainable change in behavior, there has to be, as we said, this ownership, right? No matter what is
Mhm.
going on in our life or our body, yes, that we have the power to create change, even if it's just in our response, in our attitude to it. How, just like Sean, going out and inspiring so many people and doing what he can to improve our planet. Um, how do we do that for ourselves, especially when we're in that kind of disempowered mindset, like your friend who, lost his business 30 years ago? How do we make that shift that the 49ers were able to make during that game?
Well, sometimes there's a bit of a stigma around um, mental health and getting help, especially amongst men. So I think people need to be willing to get a coach, get a therapist, get who is that person that is going to help you see clearly and who's that person that can help you resolve some of these issues. I mean, when we look at some of the great players in sports, those great players wouldn't have been great players without their great coaches. Um, my buddy Chuck Woolery, he was the host of Love Connection and Wheel of Fortune, and he's an avid fisherman. And Chuck kind of has that same model that you're only as good of a fisherman as the best person you ever fished with. So that would be my first comment. Who is it you're bringing into your life that you can trust, who has sound wisdom? And again, is it a therapist? Is it a business coach? Is it a life coach? Is it someone like yourself, someone like Joe Polish, somebody like Dan Sullivan? Who is it you're bringing in? Um, we all have a tendency to not want to spend money on our knowledge base, on our coaching, on our education. Um, I will tell you, I spend an enormous amount of money on coaching, being with Dan Sullivan, being with Joe Polish. Uh, I'm also with EOS. My companies are EOS companies. So I'm spending six figures on people telling me things. Um, and by the way, people pay me six figures to tell them things. Anybody who pays me six figures for me to tell them something gets back eight figures. Anybody who is going to Joe or Dan or yourself or anything and paying those numbers, if you're paying attention and you're going in there with an open mind and an open heart and you're listening and you embrace what you get, you'll more than get your money back. It's important that you bring these type of experts into your life. And I remember my first couple times at coach, I was like, I don't know if I'm getting anything out of this. This guy's just babbling about 10x and so on and so forth. It took a little while, but stuck with it. And it's like, okay, yep, I'm kind of getting this now. And we need to do those things. We need to bring those experts into our life.
I agree. As you know, I'm a member of the Genius Network and other things like that. I have my own coaches, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So, so one of the ways that we do this is, of course, this decision, right? First of all, it starts with a decision. Sometimes it's a decision that is inspired by events in our life. Oftentimes, events that bring us to our knees, or whether it's because we personally experience them or we witness somebody who we love experience them, and it shakes things up, right? It's time for a change, and the ownership piece of it, right? It's got to be me, right? I need to be the one to go to meet with these individuals, for example, to learn things or to listen to podcasts or to learn things that I can then choose to act on, to implement and to transform my life. What about those individuals that are listening to this now and saying, all right, either I don't have the resources to invest in this, or I don't have the time. That's more often than not, right? The issue. I don't have the time to go and do all of this stuff, right?
You don't have the time not to. So Dan Sullivan's got a great book out called 10X is easier than 2X. And the premise of the book is simply this. When you're trying to 2X your life, so I'm going to double the size of my company, I'm going to double what I'm doing. What you do is you start trying to bolt on more of what you're doing. So I'll work longer, I'll work harder, I'll hire 2 more people that can, expand my capabilities. I'll do more of what I'm doing. When you're trying to 2X, you have 50 different paths you can go down. I'll try to bring on new clients. I'll try to get these clients to spend more money. I'll add a new service. And what happens is your brain is very distracted because you're running down all these rabbit holes. When you decide that you're going to 10X your life or 10X your business, all of a sudden, most of all the rabbit holes get closed.
Hmm.
And the reason is because you all of a sudden you look at, well, I'll work longer hours. And then your brain says, well, that's not a 10X strategy. I can't work 10 times more hours. So throw that one out. Well, I'll get my current clients to spend more money. Well, that's not a 10X strategy. So let's throw that one out. And what you find is you find that the pathway to 10X becomes very narrow and very focused. So it becomes kind of like Pareto's law, where 80% of your clients are bringing 20% of the revenue, 20% of your clients are bringing 80% of the revenue. 80% of your time is spent chasing 2X opportunities, and only 20% of your time is spent chasing 10X opportunities. What if you stop chasing all of those 2X opportunities and 100% of your effort went on chasing the 10X opportunity? All of a sudden, you just got rid of 80% of your activity. You have plenty of time. Because, and I challenge anybody to take your day and write down everything you do. And in the first column, write down things that motivate me, excite me, that I'm great at. In the next column, put down things that I'm good at. Don't necessarily excite me, but I'm good at these things. In the third column, things I do that I'm not good at and I don't like doing. You'll find that 60 to 70% of your day is spent in the C list, things I'm not good at and things I don't like doing. And then another 15 or 20% is spent in things I'm good at, but I'm not particularly, crazy about it. And then in the list that is the things that motivate me, excite me, that I'm great at, you're probably spending 10%, no more than 20% of your time in that list. Now, once you make this list, make a commitment for the next 90 days to get rid of as many things in the C list as you can. How do I get rid of them? Well, guess what? We all have unique abilities. I'm going to go back to a Dan Sullivan comment. Dan says people who spend all their time trying to shore up their weaknesses end up as people with really strong weaknesses. Stop focusing on what you're no good at. And it's not even, and here's the thing I try to get people to understand. This is not even oftentimes we hear people say, only do the things you're good at and let other people do the things you're not good at. I like to go one step further. Not only is it only do the things you're good at, do the things that only you are good at. Because there are other people in the organization which are still good at doing some of these things. Just because you can bring value to a meeting or value to a conversation doesn't mean you need to. It means go spend your time doing the things that no one else can do. And all of a sudden, you have all kinds of time. You have time to do all kinds of stuff. Coach is built on a model. Again, I didn't come here to pitch coach, but coach is built on a model of free days, buffer days, and focus days. And the idea is for a coach member to take at least 160 to 180 days a year off. Well, most people are freaked out by that because they're thinking 100, 160, 180 days. Well, it's 104 days on the weekend. So you're telling me you want me to take 2 months off? My company can't survive me not there for 2 months. Shock for you. Your company will thrive with you not there for 2 months. Because one, you're off doing recreation. That's what recreation is. Recreate. You're off clearing your mind, coming up with better ideas, getting better vision. You don't get great visions. You know, the old saying, you can't read the label when you're stuck inside the jar. When you're in your office and you're solving a problem, you're inside the jar. You can't read the label. When you get outside of your office and you're doing something totally different, something that you're passionate about that has nothing to do with the business, that's when you'll have the inspirations. Meanwhile, you give your team the opportunity to rise up. In most cases, they won't fall back because you're gone. They'll step up if you pick the right people. They want the opportunity. My people, it's hysterical. So our offices are in Detroit, have a place in Florida. My team will literally say, "Oh, we're so excited when you go to Florida for a week or two because when you come back, you're so energized and you've got all these great ideas, and it lets us catch up to you." Because now we've got the next couple of weeks to just work on the stuff you said 2 weeks ago and to prove that we can do it and to show you that we've got it all handled and that we've got it done. And they don't have me breathing down their neck, asking questions because like any entrepreneur, I'll stir up everything. Another thing that happens as a boss is we have to be careful because what we think are random ideas become orders inside our organizations. So an example would be if I walked in and said, "Hey, I wonder if we should change the colors on our company website." I may just have looked at some other website and thought, "I like their colors better." My web development team will take that as, "Oh my God, we have to change the colors on the website. We've got to do it now." I actually never said change any colors on the website. I was just thinking out loud. But our thinking out loud has that kind of impact on our people. So one, we have to be careful with what we think out loud. But two, when we give them time and we go do things and get our head together, when we go on a retreat, when we go to Genius Network, when we go to Strategic Coach, that's the thing. You were at the meeting for Genius Network. There was 450 people in the room. Practically every person in that room is the smartest person in the room in their world. Is that a fair assumption? In their own world, when they're in their office and they're in their environment, they're probably the smartest person in the room. When you put 450 smartest people in the room in one room, no one is the smartest person in the room anymore. So all of a sudden, you're amongst people who you can have conversations with that you couldn't have anyplace else because they understand you. If you've been a successful entrepreneur, most of your family won't understand you. My father passed away not knowing what I did for a living. For the life of him, he couldn't figure it out. Why do people pay you so much money to talk on a phone? It evaded him. uh, For most of the people at Genius Network, their families don't know what they do for a living. And that's okay. But think about it. You've passed your family. For most of us that have been successful, we've exceeded our family's ability to guide us, to help us. We've exceeded most of our friends' ability to help us, our old friends, because we've probably passed them career-wise. Your employees can't be that sounding board because they work for you. They're there to make you happy. So you need to surround yourself with people at your level who will be honest with you and understand your plight, understand what you're thinking. A lot of people kid around and call it, rich people problems. Because yes, I have been at tables at Strategic Coach or at Genius Network where there's 8 or 10 of us at a table and we're discussing the problems of managing our estates for generational wealth. Well, how are you making sure your kids, don't go squander this? And that's not a conversation most people have. And most people who are not in that circle would say, oh, well, I should be so lucky to have your problems. But they're real problems. They're real issues. Think about it. You want to take your kid and leave your kid $50 million all at once and not have taught them how to manage wealth? You're setting them up for a disaster. And most people say, well, how could the kid not survive with 50 million? You could ruin a kid's life with $50 million if you don't do it right. And that's why you need other people who have those experiences.
So thank you. I agree with you, and I believe in the power of community when it's the right community. Yeah. And as you said, where we can learn things, where we can contribute to others learning things and improving, where we can believe in one another, right? Have this kind of collective momentum that is happening for one another. And all of that, right, kind of goes back to our own mind and our own decisions, right? Number one, the decision to embrace a change that may be very frightening because it has some level of uncertainty, perhaps some level of risk. We don't exactly know how things are going to play out, and so the body's resistant. And so from that place where we make the decision, then it's around how do we use our mind to allow us, to feel safe, to make decisions that are maybe a little bit riskier, to invest in ourselves, right? To be willing to let go of the 2x, right, in pursuit of the.
So it takes courage. It takes courage.
How do we get that kind of courage, right?
First, we have to understand what courage is.
Yeah.
Courage is not fearlessness. So fear is wetting your pants out of fear. Courage is doing what needs to be done with wet pants.
So how did you get that?
So think about it. Courage doesn't require you to be this fearless, person. You can absolutely have fear. You should. If you're 100% fearless at all times, there's probably something broken in you. Fear is a good natural response that people need to have. So when we're looking at how to change our life, whether it's I'm going to get a divorce, or whether it's I'm going to open a business, or I'm going to, 10x my current business. How do we analyze? How do we look at this objectively? How do we put ourselves in a third person environment? And I'm going to give you an example. This was in another book I wrote. When we want to predict our own future, the key is simply this. Let's say that you have a great friend and you've been friends with this woman since high school. And she has a track record of finding the wrong men. And we all have these friends. And she calls you up one day, I just met this guy, and I think this guy's the one. And she tells you about him, and you meet him, and you tell her, this is the same guy as the last five. She can't see it because she's a part of it. We can see it instantly because we're not emotionally charged to it. We're a third person standing back and saying, okay, what do I see here? So the question becomes, how do you become the third person in your own life? How do you step outside and say, what would I be telling my friend if I had a friend doing this and I know everything I know? What would I tell them to do? Now, go find someone in that trusted circle who is similar to you, someone who has similar experiences, and say, I'm thinking about doing this, and here's what I analyzed, and here's what I came up with. What am I missing? You're not asking them for their opinion. You say, what am I missing? What am I not seeing? Where's my blind spots? And again, they're not emotionally attached, and they'll probably find some of your blind spots, and you can analyze the blind spots. But we have to realize that, again, we can't read the jar. We can't read the label when we're stuck inside the jar. So how do you get outside of that jar so that you can see what's going on? Um, and I'd probably say that's probably the big thing. And again, it's not about being fearless. It's about doing what you need to do in your fear. When you look at making a new decision, what's the first thing you need to have? You need to have courage. So now we have courage. Well, what comes after the courage? Commitment. I had the courage to say, okay, I'm going to go do this. What's the next thing I need to do? I need to commit to doing it. So now that I've committed to doing it, what do I need to do now? Well, now I need to go get capabilities. Because whatever it is I decide to do, I'm not qualified to do it on the day I decided to do it, right? So I've got the courage to move forward. I'm committing to doing it. Now I need to go get capabilities to go do it. And what happens after I get capabilities? I have an entire new skill set. I have mastered something completely new. Uh, One of the people that influenced me when I was young, I had people that I looked up to as a kid: Tom Edison, Ben Franklin. I was a very strange child. Tom
Mhm.
Edison, Ben Franklin, and Blaise Pascal.
Mm.
Blaise Pascal was a 15th century mathematician, and Pascal is the guy who came up with the odds of probabilities and outcomes and so on and so forth. Pascal had a comment, which was, it is impossible for one to know everything about everything. So it is incumbent to know something about everything. And that's always where my thinking has been, there and on epistemology. How do I know what I know? Most people in this country have a mongrel philosophy. And what I mean by that is their philosophy for life was created by their parents, their teachers, their schools, the media, movies, friends. They've never sat down and said, what are the values that I hold dear? What are the things that are important to me? What are the things that I can never give up on? What are the lines that I will never cross? No one, very few people sit down and really come up with that philosophy. And people think of philosophy as being, it's kind of a dumb thing that you take a semester of philosophy. We all have to have a philosophy. We can choose it, or we can allow it to just be handed to us. When we don't create our own philosophy, that's when we start to have things like, well, I'm not good enough for that, and I'm not capable of that, or things like that don't happen for me, or, well, I wasn't born into a family with money, or whatever the case is. You need to decide what your philosophy for life is. What do you want to have? Some of the most successful people I know, first off, if you go to Genius Network, you'll find out that the majority of people in Genius Network have probably been bankrupt 2 or 3 times before they became, very wealthy. But most of the wealthy people I know have had couple, 2 or 3 spectacular failures, and then they figured it out. I mean, you look at Hershey. So Hershey went bankrupt, I think, 6 times. So you would have to ask yourself, so did he have an indomitable spirit, or would any idiot figure out how to make money on a chocolate bar after 6 times? But most people won't get up 6 more times. They won't go get back up and try again. That's that's what people need to do. And as I said before, courage isn't fearlessness. Courage is doing what you need to do with wet pants.
So, if you're willing to share a little bit from your own experience of when was a time that maybe you didn't quite have that courage in that moment, maybe you weren't in that state to pursue something that was meaningful to you, and you somehow were able to shift the momentum, set your mind straight, believe in yourself and commit to doing that.
So I grew up in a very low to middle class town. My father was a plumber, and that was what the family business was, and that's what that's what my parents expected me to do. And I actually was a plumber. I actually do have a license. I am actually a licensed master plumber. But when I decided to move beyond that, it was very disappointing to them. And like I said, they still never figured out what it is I do for a living. But you don't have to take your current circumstances. Your current circumstances are your launching pad, but they're not what's going to limit you. This is the greatest country in the world. We're not a caste system. Anybody from any level of life in this country can climb up to any other level of life in this country. I mean, look at the stories of the backgrounds of most successful and wealthy people. The majority of wealth in America isn't created by inheritance. It's created by self-made people who created it themselves. And the difference is, when you look at someone who does that, when you have that 10x mindset, you're not living in a want-based world or a need-based fear world. You're living in a want-based world. When we're talking about needs, I need to make a living. I need to make more money because I can't pay my bills. I need to get this. Needs always require explanation. Wants don't require explanation. I want this new car. Why? Because I want it. I don't need to explain it to you. That's what I like. And I want it. And as long as I'm paying for it and I'm not asking you to pay for it, I'm not hurting anybody. The other thing that we learn is people that are based on needs live in a world of scarcity. People that are based on wants live in a world of abundance. When we look at, I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to drift into a little bit of a political thing. We look at Elizabeth Warren, senator. Elizabeth Warren is constantly on the stump talking about millionaires and billionaires need to be taxed. They need to have their money stripped from them. Their money needs to be given to the poor, so on and so forth. The reason is because she lives in a world of scarcity. She thinks if Elon Musk has $1 billion, there's someone else with no money. She doesn't understand that wealth is created. They live in a world where, well, there's only $3 trillion in circulation. And if he's got a trillion of it, then no one else has any. And they miss the idea that if I go buy a beat up house for 40 grand and I buy $40,000 worth of material and I do all the work myself and I sell it for 120, I just printed $40,000 in new wealth into the economy. I literally just printed money. Wealth isn't finite. Wealth is fungible. You can create wealth. There is no shortage.
So how did you make that shift, right, to that mindset that you just mentioned? Here you were, a plumber from a family, that had perhaps a different mindset. What was that threshold for you that created the momentum to change your trajectory?
So as a kid, I'd be driving around in a plumbing truck in a van, and I'd go to these nice neighborhoods, like where I live now.
Hmm.
And I would see all these $1 million homes. And even as a kid, as 16, 17-year-old, I would drive through these neighborhoods and I would just keep asking myself, what do they do? How did they do this? I need to find out how they did this. So I always had this curiosity. It was never a jealousy. I never drove through a neighborhood and said, look at these people with their Ferraris. No, I'd say, look at this guy's got a Ferrari. How did he do that? I want to go talk to him. I want to ask him, how did you do this? And that's where my mind was wrapped around. My mind was wrapped around is I need to talk to these people and find out how they do this. There's an old adage that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. During the course of my life, certain key people kept showing up. Just people who, and this was the strangest thing. I would be this 22-year-old, 23-year-old that you don't know anything. And some 50-year-old guy with some massive experience and wealth would just like me. And let me show you how I do what I do. And I would learn what he had. And then the next person would come along. Well, let me show you what I do. And I was always grateful and always respectful and always wanted to bring value back. But when you go looking for the answers, they will appear. They will show up. The fun part for me is now I know that I'm that guy who shows up.
Right.
Now it's my turn.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that one of the biggest lessons, reminders that I'm getting from this conversation is really the power of our mindset. So, we have these threshold moments and we're right there at the moment of decision. And as you said, after decision comes commitment, and then comes the gaining the capabilities. But it really first starts, right? The universe is going to create the threshold moment, right? The
Yep.
question is, what choices do we make in that moment? Do we choose to take ownership or to come up with excuses? Do we choose to embrace that courage with wet pants, yet, move into the discomfort with a sense of a faith, a deeper belief in the fact that everything is possible. It's an abundance mindset. Everything is possible. I don't yet know how or when or with whom, and I know it's going to happen. Yeah,
It's not why me, it's why not me.
that's right. That's really at the essence of all of this. And for every,
Why me is an excuse. Why me is why does everything bad happen to me?
yeah.
Add that one word. Why not me? And everything changes, doesn't it?
That's right. Because every single person listening, including you and I, is absolutely worthy and deserving of having whatever our heart desires. And we're capable of learning whatever it is that we need to learn. We know this from neuroscience. We can learn what we need to learn, right? Take those steps one after one to build more momentum, to build more self-belief, to build a better network of people that we can support and can support us, and it'll grow from there. And it starts with, why not me?
building wealth in this country is really actually quite easy. It's not tough at all. Um, the first things you have to know is uh, do what you said, show up on time, say please and thank you. If you literally do those things, you will be a superstar employee at any company, right? So just as an employee, you'll be a superstar. Now let's go another step past that. So now I'm doing those things. Okay, I've got that down. What's next? Well, what's next is when we do what we said and we show up on time and we say please and thank you, opportunities will present themselves to us. Now we need to have one, the good sense to identify the opportunity, and two, the courage to seize the opportunity. Everyone has had these opportunities put in their lap. Just most people don't act on them. Some people don't act on them because it looks like too much work. Some people don't act on it because things like that don't happen to me, or I'm not good enough for that, or I could never do that. But again, it gets back to, of all the things I've done, and I've done a lot of stuff, I've never been qualified to do any of it. Never. But once I made the commitment, I then went out and got the capabilities.
That's right. I so appreciate that you're sharing this and sharing this in such simple language that we can all get and connect with. And I see this, this mindset of why not me as, an invitation to explore the possibility that when you believe it, you will see it, right? So I don't have to be the expert. I don't have to know all the people. I don't have to know the perfect plan in order to move toward what I want, right? When I believe that it's possible and I say my please and thank you, and I do with integrity what I say I'm going to do,
Isn't that amazing how simple that is?
it is, and it's energetic.
Yeah, show up on time, do what you said, say please and thank you.
That's right. That's right. Because then we, build integrity within ourselves, right? And with others. And people trust us and they believe in us. And their belief, increases the momentum of our belief in ourselves. And that is it. And that is all, because our minds do have the ability to create change within ourselves and our planet. And I so thank you for being here today and sharing your own story, which is remarkable. And, these beautiful nuggets from your own life, from Dan Sullivan, you just have embraced so many concepts and things in your life, and you're able to process them in the moment for all of us in a very objective way to guide us as to what we need to do. So what do you want to leave our listeners with today, Mark? What do you think is the biggest gift that you can give to them in this moment?
Your future needs to be bigger than your past. Because when your future ceases to become bigger than your past, the universe will start asking for the parts back. And that's when health problems come, and that's when things go wrong. Dan actually has a saying I think is hysterical. Dan says, when the Grim Reaper shows up, look busy.
I love it. And when you're busy with, when you're busy with meaningful things, things that uplift you and contribute to others, we tend to live longer and live in a much more fulfilled way, which also uplifts everyone around us. And you've done that for us today.
Let me give you a quick example. The founding fathers of the United States, almost all of them lived into their 80s. This was at a time when the average lifespan was 36. So a 32-year-old man during the Revolutionary time was considered an elder statesman. But remember, you could also join the Continental Army at 14 because you were a man at 14, because life was shorter. So the average person lived to be 36 years old, and they lived into their 80s. Why did that happen? Because they lived with purpose. They were building a country. They had something bigger than themselves that they were working on. Their focus was making something that was bigger than them, that transcended them, that was going to have a legacy beyond them. And that's why the founding fathers lived such long lives in a time where you didn't do that. The same holds true now. Purpose has an enormous impact on our health. You and I discussed off air psychoneuroimmunology. Psychoneuroimmunology, folks, is the simple belief, and it's not a belief, it's a scientific fact, that our thoughts can have physiological impact on the cells of our body. We can think ourselves to death. We can think ourselves healthier. My mother, I'm going to give you this as the last example. My mother had cancer, and at the very end, the doctor told her, it's time to quit the treatments. You're going to have 2 or 3 months to live, and it's time to call it a life. My mother, with the 2 weeks after that, she went and did everything she wanted to get done. She wanted to make amends with this person, cure this broken relationship over there. She did all those things in 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, she decided this was the night she was going to die. Now remember, she had 2 or 3 months, according to the doctor. She died that night because she decided she was going to die on her terms. And I was with her. I was in her room all night. And the funny thing is, she literally popped up out of bed in the middle of the night and looked at me and said, "Am I still here?" "You're still here, Mom." "Oh, good Lord." And laid back down. And she ended up passing away about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning that night. She thought herself to death. You can also think yourself to life. It works in both directions. Well, any other final thoughts?
Well, one of those thoughts is just tremendous appreciation for you and for your gifts today for all of us. And another one is really for the gift of our human capacity to focus and to choose what we think about and therefore what we bring about.
We have a tendency to grossly overestimate what we can get done in a day, and we grossly underestimate what we can accomplish in a year. And if we can get people to start focusing on quarters and years and not days, they'll be amazed with what they can accomplish.
That's right. And the key word here is can accomplish.
Absolutely. Future must be bigger than your past. I am 66 years old. I have 8 companies. I am now a professional race car driver. I have the Guinness World Record as the oldest professional rookie race car driver in history. My future is bigger than the past. I've got a whole set of goals, including for the race team, on what races I'm going to win next. And I go out and I compete with guys that are 20 years old. And in many cases, I can beat them. And I don't beat them because I'm bolder and crazier. I beat them because I'm smarter. So you learn where your gifts are and where your skills are. And you don't try to beat somebody at what they're doing. You do you. You figure out what it is you're best at and what you're good at, and you lean all of your skills and all your effort into that.
That's right. That's right. Well, once again, I'm just very, very grateful to you, Mark, for this beautiful conversation, for the beautiful examples and advice, guidance that you have for everybody listening.
Well, thank you. It was wonderful to be here with you.
How can people learn even more about you, your amazing agency, the books that you've written?
My most recent book is Hypnotizing. Tizing is spelled like advertising. And you can get that at Amazon, or I think there's a website for the book. There is a new website going up Friday, and I've got to find out what the URL is. I think the new website going up is Meet Dr. Mark Young, I think is the URL. Or you can go to Jekyll Hyde Labs, where you can learn about the agency. And we have a bunch of different websites because we have all these different companies all over the place. I have way too many things going on at one time, but it plays to my ADD brain because it allows me to switch gears every couple of hours. I'm in this business, and now 2 hours from now I'm going to be in a different business. Now I'll go do that. And it plays for me. It doesn't play that way for everybody. Some people need to focus in one area and be the best in that area. My key is not being the best at everything. My key is having vision and knowing how to find the right people to go carry out the vision. Because I understand there are lots of people out there who are better at doing everything than me. I'm better at having the vision and combining resources and putting them together so that they can go do that.
Yeah. And as you said earlier, that is an invitation for all of us to take a little bit of time away, sometimes from our companies, our lives, to do that recreation. I mean, recreate,
Absolutely. Recreate.
right? Create that future which is bigger and better and more meaningful than our
And think
past.
about that word, recreation. I got to tell you, you've probably seen this. How many times people are shocked when they break the word down and they realize recreation is recreation.
That's right. That's
But
right.
it doesn't occur to people. They just think it's wasting time. It's just goofing off.
Yeah,
It's not wasting time and goofing off. It's recreating.
that's right. That's right. Because it allows us to go inward and remember what's most important to us. And I think that that exercise that you gave us all earlier with kind of those three columns and realizing what do we want to keep and what needs to go or to be shifted, and so that we can create our life and focus our thoughts in a way that is highest and best for ourselves and, of course, for everybody involved.
You as an individual, you have far more capacity than you realize. We all have far more capacity than we realize. And it is, if you're alive and you're breathing and you can still think, then you still have a future. And what are you going to do with that future? How are you going to bring value to the world? How are you going to show up? What's the value you're going to bring to the world? And how is that value going to far exceed anything you ask for
Mm.
in return?
Oh, well, with all my love, thank you, thank you, thank you, Mark. This was such a joy. You really
Same here.